what we've shifted when we talk about co-teaching is not just talking about what are the 6 co-teaching practices, but we're shifting from what is what's happening in co-teaching, but how are we closing gaps for kids with disabilities? Because when we look at our data in this region, we know that our proficiency rates for our kids are very low, and when you look at the data, most of our IEP kids are novice. And so that's with accommodations and modifications. So as we shift thinking about how we're going to co-teach, when are those opportunities, we kind of shift thinking about how we do co-teaching. And so that's kind of what we're going to spend the next little bit. And so just for today, we're just going to talk about what co-teaching is. We're going to talk about the best practices, and then we were going to actually plan out a lesson. You guys could work together to plan a lesson for co-teaching. And so we co-teach because we have to implement the IEP. So in our students' IEP, we talk about them having instruction, and then we're in the co-teaching because we've decided that's the best environment for kids. So we've decided that being in a regular ed classroom with those supports gives them the most access. That's the least restrictive environment. So when we do that, those times when we're in there co-teaching together, it gives us 2 teachers in the group, which reduces that teacher-student ratio. So we know the smaller group size, the more impact we're going to have. And then we can get targeted support for kids. So those are really the why we do it, because that's what it says in our IEP, because we can have 2 teachers teaching together, and we can give levels of support for those kids. And so the other thing is, how do we get all the kids engaged? Because most of the time, you think about when our kids are in a regular ed classroom, are they engaged all the time? And I'll just let y'all answer that. Y'all think they're engaged all the time? No, they're not. Because what happens is our kids maybe don't know the answer, or they're not going to be the one called on. So they're going to sit real quiet or not make eye contact or sit in the back of the room and either disturb class or get trouble to get kicked out because they're not going to participate. And we don't call on those most of the time because they're not going to have the answer. And so they opt out.
I like to participate, but with all the other crap, like they'll talk about everything else going on in the school.
But the academic piece.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we think about increasing engagement, that's when we get more leverage for our kids, and we never let them opt out. And there's simple ways to do that. We're going to do some activities with that here in just a second. And then what we also know based on the research is our kids probably get the least amount of practice turns and feedback, but they need more practice turns and feedbacks than any other kid, right, in those other classes, especially if our kids are MMD kids who have a processing speed or they have working memory index is low. They need multiple turns. So with one, like a child that's performing at average might need to see a vocabulary word 7 times. An MMD kid probably needs to see it 32 times, right? There's some research around how many more times that a kid that has a cognitive deficit or academic deficit needs to see it over, in addition to what kids, general kids that are performing at grade level need. And the other thing is they need our corrective feedback immediately. So we have to correct that and then get them on the right track right then, because if not, it's so much more difficult to unlearn than it is, and to relearn it the right way than it is to learn it, And you can try to think about, if it's something that you've learned to do one way, so like math, when we think about ways we solve math problems now. And we were taught a very different way to do mathematics on a lot of those things, but then, so we're trying these new approaches with this concrete models or semi-concrete, and it's very difficult. So it's hard for us to unlearn the way we know, because it works, right? It's the way we do it. And then to teach them that way. So we think about that same thing for our kids. Once they learn it, and it kind of really moves to that long-term memory function of the brain, we want to make sure they got it right. And we're not getting, because it's hard enough for them to do it that way. And then the other thing is, we want to have flexible grouping with kids. Because, when we started thinking about co-teaching, and I can talk about when I was back in the classroom and we were talking about co-teaching, most of the practices we use in co-teaching are the least effective. And so we would have kids that were just pulled over to the side of the room and they were with the aide or resource teacher most of the day, and they weren't still part of the classroom. So they were isolated within that whole, there was kind of segregation between the regular kids and the kids with IEP, even in that regular classroom. And so what we know is, if you never know what it looks like to be an exemplar model, right? If they never get a good example, how are they going to know what that's supposed to look like? And by having flexible grouping, there's always a task or a job that kids can do that can be part of that group, right? They can be the reporter. There's all kinds of tasks that we can give within groups that allows kids to be successful. And so that's really why we have to start thinking about how do we change engagement. Once we get kids involved in learning, our performance is going to increase. And so, but when you look at the data, we just released that data in April. We just got the data on how our kids are doing on novice and apprentice. Because the proficiency rates, we have about 90% novice and apprentice in reading and math. And so you look at 4th grade, and then there's 8th grade, and then the high school level. And there's some variation. Like reading we're probably at 75% novice and apprentice. So only about 20, I think it's just like 22 are proficient. And again, that's with they have an accommodation or modification. So what we're missing, or part of that we believe, is that we're missing the instruction piece of it. We're giving them the accommodations and we're giving them the modifications that they need, but we're not teaching them how to use those. For example, if you give a kid a graphic organizer, if you don't teach a kid how to use that graphic organizer and they can use it across other settings, they're not really getting it. They're just giving them an accommodation, right? Rather than a special design instruction. So it's a little different. And so when we started kind of polling special ed teachers and talking about what's the difference, we still have trouble even in special ed knowing what the difference is between those things. So part of that, we know that in order to improve that proficiency rates, we're going to have to change the way we teach. And so that's where we're getting into those the 6 co-teaching approaches. So that's where we're at right here. So these are the 6. You'll see there's a little star beside of the ones that are the most effective. But I'm going to ask you, there's a little index card in your little pad, your little folder right in there. Have your number on it. There's just a blank index card. And I'm going to just give you like 1 minute. 1 minute. I'll just give you 1 minute. We'll see. But write down everything you know. I tell you this way. Just draw a line down the middle, either way, sideways, and put a plus. Put a plus on one side and a minus on the other. So everything that you know that is good about co-teaching, write that down. And then everything that you think is a negative about co-teaching, I want you to list that also on the other side. So there should be like a plus delta or a plus minus. And just spend about 1 minute talking about those. So let's talk about what we're going to do is you got your list. And so since there's 2 of you, I'm going to say 1, 2, 1, 2. So your ones, I want you to just turn to your partner and talk about what your pluses are. What's your plus about co-teaching? What do you already know that's good about co-teaching? So you all just share with your partner and go. So think about the whole activity. Think about from the beginning, what did everybody do, and then what did partners do? So thinking about that from the lens of how that works in the classroom instruction, what happened in that activity?
We got off track.
But did everybody feel like their card? Right? So everybody had to generate independent ideas. And then you were allowed to have a conversation. So before you would share out in a whole group, you had the option of having a partner to have a conversation with. So if I ask you now, table 1 over here, what were some big takeaways from your discussion?
Oh, are you really asking?
Yeah.
I was like, I'm still following you.
So let's apply this one.
We both kind of were on the same track on that. You know, you get 2 teachers, so you get the lower ratio too. But then you get, an expert in each field. You get, like, I'm not certified in math. So the math teacher knows how to teach math. I know SDI. So, that was kind of, you had that really good partnership there for that. So we thought that was a good takeaway. And then, was there anything else? I said be with their same age peers, shared knowledge, and I think you kind of said the same thing as far as the credentials and things.
And the different viewpoints.
Yes.
Some people have seen
Different teaching styles, so you can reach different kids. That was something that Angela said that was good. So, did you want negatives too?
No, we'll come back to that in just a second.
Okay.
But so what about you guys? So that was good. So those are things. So what about you guys? What were some of the positive things that you said about co-teaching? What that you know is good about co-teaching?
Pretty much same, it's 2 teachers in a room.
And like same teaching, different strategies of teaching, like to reach different kids. And then like you can reach more students with the smaller groups because you have more teachers in the room.
And you're able to have 1 teacher per working and somebody making sure they're staying on task.
So there's a lot of different ways to use it. So what really happened was everybody had a response. Then you were able to turn to a partner and have another response, and then even build on yours. and then you share out. So it kind of scaffold, right? So it don't just say, okay, I'm gonna call on you, or I'm gonna call on you to answer this question, but you scaffold that learning. You give kids an opportunity to write down everything they know, and then build on what they know. You can use that as a pre-assessment, you can use that as a way to see what kids already know, and you can do that in math, you can write down a math problem, right? And have kids solve that, and then they turn to their partner. Did I get that right? But what happens is the simple thing of doing that shifts the level of engagement. Because kids now, everybody has to answer the question. So it's just something as simple as that. Whiteboards, I love whiteboards for that, because kids can put their answer on whiteboard and then everybody shares it. It don't have to be anything, this big intricate system of responses. It can be something real simple for that, but making sure that every kid has to respond, then they don't ever get to opt out. Because that's what we know about our kids. That's where I think, and that's part of where, we're at with trying to think about how we increase that level of engagement and that level of learning. So that kind of shifts the way we do that. So we'll talk a little bit about, we'll come back in a minute and talk about some of those things about the negatives as we go through them. So in order, probably if we're talking about station teaching, and I'll skip down to that one first, because station teaching we know is probably one of the most effective co-teaching practices. And we're going to talk about each one of the highest level practices. Then we have to talk about parallel teaching and then alternative teaching. So when you look at these 6 co-teaching practices, we attended Marilyn Friend wrote a book, and we brought you guys a book today for co-teaching. But Marilyn Friend authored that book on co-teaching, and we were in a session that she said, we don't spend any time on these right here anymore, because we're spending our time and energy on the ones that we know are the most effective. And so that's another little shift for us as well, because we have to think about, there are times when some of these other practices work, but when you want to get the most effective learning and use of 2 teachers, it's these strategies here. So parallel teaching is when you got one teacher that's leading the big group. Then you split the classroom and you're dividing them in half, just like I split this room right here. And one of you go with me and the other group goes with Brenda. Brenda and I are going to be teaching the exact same thing, but we're going to try to teach it a little different way. Because I heard you say just a minute ago, you're not maybe an auditory processor, you're a more of a visual, right? You need a visual. So Brenda, maybe I have a visual setup. And Brenda, do you have that one?
I have that one.
Do you have this one?
No, I don't have that
I'll give you one of those.
one. Thank you.
But so when we think about that, Brenda would split it, and she might have one that had some manipulatives, and then I had one that had visuals, but we're teaching the same thing. And what happens there is that reduces that classroom size. So if rather than having a big group, I have a small group, Brenda has a small group, and we're both teaching the same thing. They're having way too much fun.
Can I be excused? I want to go with it.
You know, she's running out infinite canvas, just on the record.
It's Virginia.
Yeah, when you're laughing, her laugh. She's doing another session of Infinite Campus, so I think we all need to go.
Exactly, then she's having more fun with it. Anyway, so parallel teaching is a great way to do it. There are a few setbacks with that one, because if you got a small space, or both of you are really loud, it sometimes can be distracting for kids. So that one you choose based on your space and kind of how well you all can teach together and do that. Now station teaching, and that's what Marilyn Friend says, probably is the most effective one.
45%.
Yep. So that one should be used probably as often as it can. And what we're meaning by station teaching is that when you're in that classroom with a kid, both the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher are running a station that whole time. And so, or at least most of the time, there might be some delivery of instruction on the front end of it, because you could be team teaching or you could be doing some of these others, but then you're going to move straight into station teaching. So that one should be the most used one, is what she recommends. And then the alternative teaching, and alternative teaching is when you have one large group and then you pull another small group off to the side. And remember when I was just said a minute ago, when I was teaching, sometimes they pulled the special ed kids onto the side or in the back of the room, and that's not what we're talking about here. Right here we're talking about so let's say you give your formative assessment at the end of class day, at the end of math class, and you see about 75% of the kids got it, but 25% didn't. So the next day, you come into class, and when you start the bell ringer, maybe one teacher pulls them to the side, those 25% that didn't get it. IEP kids or not, it doesn't matter, all kids. Anybody in that 25% that didn't get that target from the day before, you could pull them into that group. The other thing is, you know how we try to figure out that balance between how do we make sure our gifted kids, or our kids who are advanced, sometimes we can push them a little further. So we might pull that alternative group for enrichment. Or we could pre-teach. So particularly like our kids with disabilities have a terrible time with vocabulary, for example, right? So vocabulary is a big deficit for our kids. So let's say we pull a little group and we're pre-teaching them the vocabulary. Then they can go back and join another group. So we can pre-teach, we can reteach, or we can enrich by using alternative teaching. So that's the way to think about that. And so the biggest thing is making sure that it's not the same special ed kids pulled back there to that little table all the time. And then the other one is the team teaching. And so that one is sometimes effective, but what Marilyn Friend says in the research is when you team teach, which maybe you're teaching together, but once you do that, you want to go straight into something else. You would only want to use that a small percent of time. Because, one teacher's leading, because you got the content specialist, and then you got the learning process specialist as the special ed teacher. So, sometimes if I had to go into a high-level math class, I'm not going to be as good at that. But so there's some things that I might can do to team teach. I might can do the bell ringer. I might be able to do, I might be able to model with the calculator. I might be able to create graphic organizer on the wall, something like that. But I'm not going to be the expert in that. But I might be the expert on the learning process. So if you just team teach all the time, it's not really using the skills of both teachers fully, right? Because, if you're leading a smaller group, that's much more effective than you're up there just writing all the time or just, charting or whatever. Then the other one is the one teach, one observe. And so we used to do that one a lot with the one teach, one observe and one teach, one assist. The one teach, one observe is good if you're collecting data. Because how we're always trying to figure out how do we progress monitor kids when they're in a co-teaching setting, right? And so teachers putting up the bell ringer, and you've got your clipboard, and you're checking to see how kids are getting, did they get it or did they not get it? So you're assessing that, right? That's when one teach, one observe works the best. Now, if you got one teach, one assist, that's when we go, I call that the coffee drinking strategy. Because I work with a guy, and he carries his coffee cup around, and that's his strategy. Because he carries his coffee cup around every day, and he just stand there and point to the kids all the time. That's his job. Cup of coffee and pointing. And that's what he spent his day doing. And, what benefit was that to our kids? It's not. And so when we think about that, sometimes it's appropriate when you're helping kids when they're in the lesson, but then you move back into one of these strategies, right? You just shift back into that. So that's really kind of the gist of those big practices. So we're going to move in and talk about an example. Right here. So, we talked about what station teaching looks like, and in our presentation there's some videos and some examples like this. But when we talk about station teaching, we're talking about three different stations is what they recommend. So, the teacher station for the regular ed teacher, a teacher station for the special ed teacher, and then an independent one. So we've got an example here we're going to take a look at. So let's say, I just picked 5th grade. So let's say we got a 5th grade standard. They're going to try to look at the relationship between individuals or events or concepts from a historical, scientific, or technical text base. So that's what you're going to be doing in the general ed classroom, right? So we have to think about what does that look like? Well, how do we break that down if we're going to do it in a co-teaching lesson? So let's talk about it. So if we're trying to figure out how we would break that down, here's some ideas about some stations that we might use, right? So station 1 could be the regular ed teacher, and they're working on text structure. They might be doing cause and effects. They might be doing sequencing. They might be doing some events like that. While the special ed talks about how the characters in the story, so you might do character analysis, you might do something along those lines, while the third one is an independent station. So what I'm going to let you all do is while you're all working with your partner, I'm going to let y'all talk about what do you think is what could they be doing in these different stations to meet this one right here about the relationship between events, ideas, or individuals in some kind of text. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think that each one of those teachers could be doing in that reading lesson? I just give you an example, but what could they be doing? So I just want y'all to talk for a couple of minutes about what does that look like? What would they be doing in that classroom? So it's 5th grade. You're trying to look at how character develops over time. So you could be talking about character develop or how the character changes. So what's some ideas you might have to help teach that for those 3 stations? And you can just brainstorm. So y'all can talk it out, and I'm gonna give you about 2 minutes.
Same.
It's okay. You can look it up on your phone, right?
I'm not ready to crash. I hate.
I see you going down.
I'm like,
Okay. So you pick your little book and you're like.
This is a hard one. I think it's good. So you're teaching this, right? Like what kind of book, what's a story you have that, what's something that you know is like a historical or event that happens, that changes over time?
Speeches and talk about.
I'm thinking about the Civil War,
Signs.
right? You're working on something with the Civil War. You talk about the generals, General Lee, and what happens in the course of that when we're talking about Civil War.
What happened in the story, they put it in order. But the character development, you have to start it, how the character started out, what happened, did the mind change?
Okay. Speaking of the end.
Yeah, you can pick an event. Do you wanna pick an event? Because it's tough, right? It's hard to think through, it's the thinking part of that. Well, yeah.
my thinker's asleep.
No.
You can look at it.
This is hard.
It is hard.
I mean, there's a lot to that standard.
Oh, yeah. So what do you
Really
do first?
even, yes, to wrap your brain around exactly what we need to be looking at.
That's right. So that's kind of the point of the activity is, that's a huge big standard, right?
Yes, yes.
And so we're saying, let's go forth and critique, right? But so we're gonna have to break this down. We're gonna have to break this down into a bunch of different skills, right?
Yeah, and this is a reading standard.
That's a fifth grade reading, it's right out of the set, yep.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the relationship or interaction between individuals, so it can be the people, or some events, or some ideas and concepts, in some kind of historical story, or a scientific, or some kind of technical text, right? So you're looking at how that changes over time. It's not literary, because I was thinking about that book Hatchet, right? I think about how he changes over the course of the text. But this one makes it hard, so let's go back. So what you do then is you go back and you say, okay, what do they have to do in the fourth grade? So they have to, what the events happen? What are some of the things that happen? So has anybody got an idea? What will we even choose for the content for that? Anybody got an idea? That's a tough one.
Like, mine goes like history events.
Okay, so let's
Yeah,
do history. That's what I would choose.
Like the Civil War.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's pick one. What are we gonna say? Okay, so the events, I hope y'all know that, because I don't know it so good. So let's think about, so the events that happened in Pearl Harbor. Who are the people? Who are the people that we're talking about? In Pearl Harbor, who were the people?
Americans and Japanese.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back over here then, okay, so let's think about this, right? What we're gonna teach, we're gonna teach some kind of text structure, that's where you do cause and effect, or sequence, or story structure, right? So maybe the regular ed teacher's teaching cause and effect, that could be what happened in Pearl Harbor, right?
Which Japan wanted to take over the world.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about, right? So we're talking about,
Well, Japan was already invading China before Hitler got involved in World War II.
okay, so we know that's happening.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, so we're talking
So we
about,
can do like a timeline.
you can do a timeline, perfect, right, that would be an activity, so which one of the teachers is gonna do that? Which one of the teachers is gonna do that? Who's gonna do that? And how are you gonna do it? You gonna draw a visual? You gonna have a visual
I
timeline?
have to have a visual,
Yeah,
myself anyway.
So you might would say, you're teaching text structure and you're doing a timeline, because you're gonna teach that sequence. You're gonna talk about events.
And like, do you want to do it for like what led up to that, or like the events of that particular day? So like if you did that day, you could do like hour, for the
You
timeline.
could do that?
And that ties into the cause and effect too, because like you were saying, this was already happening before this, so this caused this to happen,
Right.
so the second event.
Right.
So while they're doing, could you do that while like one group's doing the timeline,
Yeah.
when they're at the other station, then they look at the cause and effect aspect of the events that
Absolutely.
happen within that
Absolutely.
timeline?
And then like station two is character development. Then you look at Hiroshito,
That's
the leader of Japan. You know what was his plan, and then you look at all that stuff.
And how was it, beginning, from the beginning, because they'll probably have some text, and they'll be reading an excerpt, there'll be something that you can base that on, right? So you know what the special ed teacher's doing then, right? The regular ed teacher's doing a timeline, the other one's working on cause and effect. So they maybe are using a graphic organizer, right? So this cause equals this effect. And I'm teaching the children how to do that. So I'm giving them a cause and effect organizer. So what am I doing? I'm providing specially designed instruction using a graphic organizer, right? My SDI is a graphic organizer. So I'm a co-teacher, or it don't matter, but we're giving the kid what they need, right? They need the instruction on how to use that. So we're modeling that. Okay, so over here.
SAS, if
Yes.
then your kids who have IEPs, who say have a graphic organizer as part of their SAS, you've taught them how to use it and they will continue to get to use that, whereas your Gen Ed kids may not continue to use that right support,
That's
so they will continue to use it.
But that becomes a scaffold for those general ed kids
Right.
that need those scaffolds to build them up. So twofold right there, right?
Yeah.
You're getting the SDI for the kids that have an IEP, and the second group of kids are having that benefit of that knowledge of those two highly qualified teachers to create that lesson. Okay, and so the next thing then is, the independent station. What are we gonna have to do? So you're talking about some really smart things that we
I
can
have
do
them
with kids.
illustrate each one.
Yes.
They can
Okay.
get pictures from the internet of different events that happen, or they can draw a picture
Mhm.
of what that event might look like.
Absolutely, so they-
Yeah.
Yeah, or have them research today, like, you know, Pearl Harbor today, like what it looks like today compared to then.
So they could be doing a research project on it. They could be, watching a video.
Or
About
they have
the
history of it in
interview.
their family.
Yeah, they could be doing some
They can
history
advance
of
and
it.
see where it fits in that time.
Right, they could be looking at that. They don't, in the independent section, that does not, that can't be teacher led, because we don't have another person to lead it. So it has to be something they can do on their own. But they can also do,
They could each watch a video of their choosing on one of the events and then share with one another.
yeah, they can do that, right? So you see the opportunity.
Yeah.
But so we were stuck a little bit, and I picked that one on purpose, because it's hard.
Yeah, it is.
That's right, it's hard, but you know, you hear how we hashed through that and we figured it out, and I always let just somebody choose what the example might be, because we had to think through it. If it's easy, but we're saying, all right, let's go forth and co-teach, right? That's what we say, let's go forth and co-teach. But we gotta really think about how we dig down and break that down, right? We break that down, and this is gonna be multiple lessons, right? We're not gonna teach all these things at one time. That's not gonna be our IPN saying. We're gonna have multiple learning intentions and multiple success criteria, right? We're gonna have some different objectives. So it's gonna be broken down. But what we do know is ultimately at the end, we want kids to be able to do that. Then we're gonna teach that cause and effect. We're gonna talk about that, the character, how they changed over those events. Was he more aggressive? Did he change his strategy? What things did that character do and have that shift throughout that piece of, that will excerpt text or that piece of text? So you see that the thinking, it's a higher cognitive demand. We're asking the kids to think about that. And our special ed kids that maybe can't write it all down, but they can think about how he changed over time. Because how do you know that? Well, the behaviors that he had. Some of he had them do this, or he had his army do this, or he chose this action. And so it gets all the kids involved. And so both teachers are teaching the whole entire time. So then at the end of your timer, 15 or 20 minute timer, the kids rotate to another station. They rotate to another station. So every kid's getting the same thing. So if I'm the regular ed teacher and I'm teaching here, I think you all said maybe doing a timeline here, I'm gonna know that I might have a visual, right? I'm gonna have a whiteboard, or I'm gonna have a visual. I'm gonna give the kids a timeline, and we're gonna write those events on that timeline so that they have it. So when they go to the next station, they're talking about character development, they've already had some of that information. But it's all, at the end, ultimately, they're gonna go through all of them. They're gonna do a little research, they're gonna learn how to do text structure, they're gonna learn how to analyze that character over time. You might be using a Venn diagram, right? Because we say that's a graphic organizer, but how do we use that graphic organizer? We teach them how to compare events, or compare and contrast. And so that shifts the way we have it happen. So no kids are opting out. Nobody's opting out. Can our IEP kids work on a timeline? They can. Some of them might need picture cues, right? They can have a picture on there. Or you can already, they can already have some things written in and they just fill in a little bit, like a close strategy for them. There are so many scaffolds that we can do as our kids rotate through those stations. But all kids benefit. And we get bell to bell teaching that way. Everybody knows what they're doing. So if you're the special ed teacher and you go in and you know exactly what your task is for that day. So you go straight in, you don't have to listen to know, but when you consult with, you conference with the teacher and you say, okay, this week on Tuesday and Thursday, I'm gonna be in there from 9:30 to 10. Or I'm gonna be in there from 9:30 to 10:10. And that gives us 2 rotations in a center, or 3, or whatever. And so I'm gonna be here Tuesday and Thursday. We're gonna do centers those days, right? We're gonna have the kids rotate through those centers. So it might not be feasible that every single day, every single minute of your day, you can co-teach. But those opportunities, when you're in the co-teaching setting, to choose those station activities and to do that work right there, really, because you think about your thinking, it's kind of, you think more about that, right? It's kind of got you thinking. That's a lot after lunch, right?
I'm sitting here trying not to sleep, and it ain't you. It's
Yeah.
all those cars are like.
I know, they wear you out. They wear you out. We're gonna get moving here in a second. But anyway, so you're thinking about it. All right.
Right.
So we're gonna talk about right now, we're gonna talk about different ways to group kids. So you either got a yellow, a green, or a orange card. All right, so if you got a green card, you're gonna be in one group. If you got a yellow card, you're gonna be in another group. And if you got an orange card, you're gonna be in a different group. So let's go ahead and let's let the orange and green work together since we have such a small group. And the yellow, you guys gotta work together. But what I did when you guys came in, I randomly selected, but I have folders ready for different levels and different groups. So I'm asking you all to group very differently. So inside, I'm not giving you a math problem, you'll be glad of that. But inside your, pull out, there's a little piece that's got a quote about co-teaching in it. All right? So you read your passage about co-teaching, they shouldn't be the same, are they?
Did y'all really get the same one?
Yeah.
Real?
Here,
Well,
That ain't even supposed to
here, I got you. Got you.
Okay. So read your thing, and then, just read your own,
Oh, we're
think about it a minute, and then you're gonna read it to your partner, and then you're gonna reflect on that. And you're gonna do a little partner activity. And I've grouped you based on color right now, except you all have the, same, but I've got the yellow group, I don't have the orange group or the green group, we just don't have enough participants.
Yeah, that's what it is.
What?
races.
Races.
Yeah, great. All right, so read your quote about co-teaching, think about it a minute, and when you're ready, I'll know you're ready when you're looking at me too, I'll give you your next task. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
y'all ready? Okay.
I got Sinead coming.
You do? All right, so read so if you're a two, if you're a two, or the person sitting on the right side of the table, you go first. Okay, so you both go first. The one on the right side of the table, and you read your passage, and then you tell them what you think about that. All right,
If
so go
your
ahead.
student in your class has two teachers and both of you have all students, Jonah Collins.
I said, ditto, what she read, because we both read, we had the same one.
Yeah, so.
It's a brain teaser.
Yeah, I know. Like,
It's a spatial thing.
this is a class we shouldn't have before lunch.
Before, that's a lot of fun. It's shut down as again. The digesting material. This is my corporate.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Includes schools, inclusive practices, tell these boards and bump the whole school displays, no total flood. But the upward trajectory is not continuous with instructional practices, and also including income teachers, persisting in big inclusion.
So
It
when we go
is.
up,
It's deep.
It's a I go on the.
Pretty much it says if you don't improve, then
with
you
their
don't
aid,
keep
with
improving.
the rest of the class, and it's.
If you don't improve the teaching,
And
then
they agree.
the performance will not.
Because I went out there with, spending the night out with myself.
Go bigger.
Yeah.
And
Get better, be better,
the
Improving.
each of those kids.
be better you.
Yeah.
So that's what my kids.
In all fields.
Okay.
I guess that's one.
Did the other person go now?
Yeah, go ahead and switch.
Y'all are slow. Just-
We already did that.
We had a really good discussion.
We talked about digestion and brain slowing and it's.
They may have digressed a little.
Yeah, a little bit. But it was pertaining to our statement. It pertained.
Well, yeah,
This is
seriously, like I
the
tell my mom,
implementation of
be
teaching us
better.
the deliberate structures.
No matter what you
and ongoing
do,
work.
be
Yes,
better.
you answer for yourself.
Yes.
That's why I tell the kids all the time, I say, if you wanna act like
My
a
new
child,
there's
now
me
treat
and
another
another
child.
teacher.
Remember, that means you
And
don't
there
get
is
all
no-
the things that all the other kids do. Push you, like if you don't act like an adult,
So
I'm not gonna let
it's
you
hard
go out
to
and break.
teach.
I'll let you go out
When
for
you
lunch,
don't have
have
that.
that, I teach every day.
So,
I'm potty training my girl, just
playing and all
because
that.
she wants to go to break, because cousin said, we got there with all those other
All
kids.
of it.
She's 17 years old and she's
Mhm.
in the doctor this week.
Because
She wants to go to bed with all the other kids and not have an accident.
Intrinsic, that's intrinsically.
Yes. I guess it's fun.
I laughed because I got one that's, she's ADHD too. She's like, you, Kristen, are the worst case of ADHD I've ever seen. Yes, I am. Like, I coach her too, like, you can tell one's a coach and.
I've taught my kids so that I can say to them, okay, if you, we're all gonna, everybody in this room, you need help sometimes in life. You got two choices, and I put up one finger to go. Be nice and if they wanna help you, or pay them.
Now, I'll go help these kids or whatever.
Is it true?
Yeah.
Be sure.
You can hardly think anybody can help you these days, nobody wants to work.
I know.
So we're
Okay. So, everybody, how did your conversations go?
Ours went great.
That's good. Alright, so next thing I'm gonna do is talk about, because we're talking about those homogeneous groups, right? So I grouped you based on, you can either group based on, group card, number, right? So what's everybody's number on the front of the card?
1.
Two, and 1, okay? So also.
You did theirs by color, theirs by number. Look at us.
I know, I
I
got
just
that.
figured it out.
That's right.
Me thinking.
That's right. Alright, the other thing is the different ability. So if you have a yellow, just come over here and stand over here. But in front of your card. If you're orange, come over there and stand where Brenda's at. Alright? And then if you're green, you stay at station 3. Alright, so I gave you that card. You had a task to work on collaboratively. Now you could be grouped by ability. Okay? So, right, we split you very quickly, but just using that card. I had the card, some of you had a card with a dot on it, right?
That's me, is that special?
Yes. So some of you had a card with a dot. But you see how easy I could move you from groups? So let's say you guys, I know, need a extra level of visual support, right? Because you mentioned that earlier. So you're gonna get more visual supports when I rotate you. Your group maybe is on grade level, and you're ready to move through. And then your grade group is
On track.
advanced. Advanced.
Kids
Advanced. Right?
Yes.
But the task, advanced.
A stands for.
So, the task, right, but you see how you can very quickly move kids. So you don't know, if you had a dot, maybe you had an IEP, maybe you didn't. But I know which kids to move based on pre-planning for that, right? And I know, so now I know when you're gonna move through stations. Then I might have a task for you, because I wanna mix it up a little bit. And I say, if you're a 2, come together. If you're a 1, come together. If you're a 3s, come together. If you're 4s, come together. So what I'm doing in that group is, again, it's the engagement piece. I'm having everybody involved. Sometimes I group you by your ability. Sometimes I group you because I want you all to have conversations with each other, whether you have an IEP or not. And then sometimes I put you in stations that way. And so you're never in that same IEP group that's pulled in the back of the room all the time. And we always have to give kids opportunities for different examples. So if I was doing this, I'd give you a piece of text that was below grade level. Then I'd give you an on grade level, and then I might give you
I came above.
a 7th grade. I might give you a piece of 7th grade text.
Yeah.
You get 5th grade text, and then you might get 2nd grade text, right?
I do this stuff all the time, and I'm thinking about, like, when I go to CDI,
Yeah.
and I split the kids up into groups. Okay, you're gonna help.
Yes, right.
And you will provide feedback, and you'll be the greeter,
Mm-hmm. Right, so we do those things naturally,
Yeah.
but when we do those and we plan them with co-teaching, it's the same way.
Yeah.
But the point is that we never use the same group all the time. We always never just keep the IEP kids in the same group. So we don't have a little bit more, but I'm gonna let you go back to your seats where your original were, because I just want y'all to get up and move around some.
Thanks.
Y'all needed that.
Yep.
That's after lunch. I was thinking about that when I was putting this together.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about.
She was like,
big
it's
group.
lunchtime, let's get them thinking.
But so while I did, it didn't take me hardly no time. I put a little comment in there, so I could have had a math problem.
Oh, no.
I could have had, I started, I
I should have easy.
didn't want to think about
I would have been very little.
Well, so, but you see that was so easy, as you came in, I gave you I gave you, so some of you guys, you look at your outside card, did you have a dot on it?
Yep.
Alright, so that could have been a different level of group within that group.
Yeah.
So if I called 2s, all the 2s, did you have a dot?
Yep.
How many had a dot? All right, so you see that's a different group. That would have been a group that I need to pull over and give a little bit extra support for versus a 2 that doesn't have that, right? So it could be that we quickly identify kids and we move kids around and let them have those conversations. So when we talk about co-teaching, that's what we're talking about, thinking about and planning that. So the last activity, I'm just gonna skip on down because the other ones are about parallel teaching, and that's when you just split the room and you guys choose that. The alternative teaching then is when we pull a small group to the side. So for example, right now everybody's got a 2, right? But there's a 1.
Loves you.
So the 1, okay, so you're the 1. So if I know 1s, everybody that's a 1, I need to reteach that lesson tomorrow. So I'm gonna say 2s, you guys do the bell ringer this morning. 1s, you come back to my table, right? I very quickly sorted and can organize kids in a way to have them moving in and out of groups. And let me just go on down. So the last one for right here, well, let's see. Yeah, I'll just skip on down here. The last activity was for you all to do one on your own. So what I want you to do is just work with your partner there at your table and think about, we've got about 4 minutes, just a couple of minutes, so just talk about it and think about it, maybe make some notes on your paper. Let's say you're getting ready to teach a lesson. Pick one that you're getting ready to teach, that's something that's coming up right now. And maybe you're working on letters and sounds, maybe you're working on sounds, right? And you're working on phonics. When you're thinking about whatever it is you might be teaching, just come up with one and talk about what would the regular ed teacher be doing? What would the special ed teacher be doing? What would you get kids to do independently? And I'm gonna give her all about 3 minutes to do that, and then that'll conclude our session for today. But just talk about it. You can talk it together. Just pick a topic. You can do reading or math.